The entire world just voted to end the 60-year blockade against Cuba, except for two countries. Who were those two countries? I'll give you a hint. Luxembourg was neither of them. I take you back to September 1961. The top song of the day was Barry Mann's Who Put the Bomp in the Bomp a Bomp a Bomp. Turns out it was Henry Kissinger. He was a young 73 years old back then, and he was actually into bombing before he was into bombing. 1961, the U.S. begins a massive embargo against the island country of Cuba. This was just a few months after the Bay of Pigs invasion, in which the U.S. tried to retake Cuba from the communist revolutionaries who had wrested it away from the capitalist oligarchs. JFK was told by the Joint Chiefs and the CIA that sending a small group of poorly armed men into Cuba would bring down the entire country. No problem. Kind of like an ant bringing down an elephant. When has that not worked? Well, actually, Lee, mosquitoes have killed more humans than any other animal on the planet, and they're quite small. Oh, yeah? Well, who made you the analogy police? All right, if I need help with my analogies, I'll demand it like a king demands it from a little help. But in fact, it became clear that the pathetic Bay of Pigs plan was actually cooked up by our military intelligence community to force JFK to invade Cuba once the men were captured. However, JFK didn't take the bait, refused to invade, and afterwards famously said he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds. And we saw how that ended up for him, which is why I, on the other hand, am a huge fan of the CIA. I have all their posters, their action figures, all their greatest hits, Allende, Lumumba, Olof Palme, Sonny Bono. Anyway, the economic war goes into effect in Cuba in the 1960s, and at the same time, our CIA was trying to kill the leader of that country, Fidel Castro. In fact, he survived 638 assassination attempts, including poisoned scuba suits and exploding cigars. The CIA was watching way too much Wile E. Coyote back then. Thank God they weren't watching Pepe Le Pew, or they would have been sexually assaulting Castro. Although, maybe then they would have successfully whacked him off. Point being, how do you think we, the United States, would have responded if another country tried to murder our president over 600 times? We would have made drug cartel hit jobs look like a meditation retreat where they sing songs and only eat sunshine. Yet Cuba has kept their cool. Their people have gone about their lives and created a pretty awesome country. And still, to this day, the U.S. empire is trying to crush them. JFK is gone, the Soviet Union's gone, Fidel Castro's gone, the CIA took him out a few years ago with natural causes. They always get their man. And yet the battle against Cuba continues. Just this month, there was another vote at the United Nations about ending the economic war. And the entire world voted 185 countries to 2 against the blockade of Cuba. The US and Israel were the 2 rogue states to vote in favor of keeping it. And the wonderful, totally cool countries of Bolsonaro's Brazil and Zelensky's Ukraine abstained from the vote. This begs the question, what is the point of the embargo on Cuba? What are we hoping to achieve? Punish a dead Fidel Castro for his sins? Punish a dead Che Guevara for his sins? Punish the Cuban cigar makers for being so damn good? I had an American cigar last week. Tasted like sucking the tailpipe of a burned-out Chevy Impala filled with dead squirrels. Well, the U.S. government actually once admitted what our real goals are. As covered by the independent outlet Multipolarista, an internal memo from the State Department in 1960 said the Cuba embargo was meant to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow the government. So our stated goal is to bring about hunger and desperation on the innocent Cuban people. But that was way back in the 1960s. We would never do that now. I mean, former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson would never admit something like that just a few years ago when talking about sanctions on North Korea.
They have had over 100 North Korean fishing boats that have drifted into Japanese waters. 2/3 of the people on those boats have died. They're being sent out in the wintertime to fish because there's food shortages. And they're being sent out to fish with inadequate fuel to get back. So we're getting a lot of evidence that these sanctions are really starting to hurt.
We're winning against North Korea because we're starving fishermen to death? What kind of psychopath would... You know what? Don't answer that. Don't answer that. So who does our economic war on Cuba impact the most? The International Labor Organization told the UN the direct and indirect effects of the embargo on the Cuban economy and people affect not only the enterprises, but even more, their workers and the population in general. The International Labor Organization is particularly concerned about the impacts on children, workers, and elderly. Children, the elderly, you know, the people I view as the real enemies. Those fucking Cuban 3-year-olds. If I had a nickel for every time one of them attacked me in a car park or hurled dirty, filthy lies at my grandma, I'd be a rich man. We're intentionally harming children. Pretty sure that makes us the bad guys, especially when the entire planet just voted against us. But I will say this, while the US has been busy shipping death, disease, and starvation around the world, you know, some in Afghanistan, some in Venezuela, some in North Korea, Cuba has also been busy shipping their horrible shit around the world, like doctors. Doctors? Is it really doctors? Yes, Cuba has a history of sending medical teams to nations in crisis. According to the Pan American Health Organization, between 2005 and 2017, the unit helped 3.5 million people in 21 countries affected by disasters such as floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, and epidemics, including the 2014 Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Probably wasn't even that many doctors, you know. It's probably like 7 or 8 guys, like the number that worked on my colonoscopy when they found that Lego jammed up there. Probably not even that. Oh, we have the number? Oh, we have the number. Over the past 50 years, it is estimated that between 135,000 and 400,000 Cuban doctors have been sent abroad. Oh, that's more than I thought it'd be. So while the U.S. empire's biggest exports are oil, which is killing our future, and weapons, which are killing our present, Cuba's biggest export is free medical care. Huh? Who do you think is in the right on this? The people giving out drone bombs and starvation, or the people giving out monoclonal antibodies used to treat Ebola? Keep in mind the number of sanctions against Jeffrey Epstein's island when he was alive, 0. Number of sanctions against Saudi Arabia after they committed a genocide in Yemen and murdered a Washington Post journalist, 0. But we are still trying to crush Cuba because they have all the cool cars. It's so not fair. The truth is, the real reason the U.S. despises Cuba is because of what Noam Chomsky called the threat of the good example. They are a socialist country that, despite our economic assault for 60 years, has done quite well. According to the World Bank and others, Cuba has the highest literacy rate in the world at 100%. Comparatively, the U.S. rate is 79%. That means a full 11% of the U.S. population won't be able to read all the fake Twitter accounts created since Elon Musk opened verification to anyone with $8, such as the verified AIPAC account saying they love apartheid, or the verified Tesla account saying our analysis engineers simulate hundreds of impact scenarios before ever killing a child in real life, or the verified Lockheed Martin account saying they're halting all weapons sales to Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the U.S. until further investigation into their record of human rights abuses. I'm just sad for the 11% of Americans who won't get to read those. Anyway, literacy is not the only way Cuba is kicking our ass. In Cuba, there is 1 doctor for every 150 patients. This is significantly better than in any other developed country. In the UK, there are 2.8 doctors for every 1,000 patients. As the LA Times said, the Cuban people receive free healthcare, free education, free housing, and pensions, along with employment security. Cuba has virtually no drug trafficking, homelessness, illiteracy, or malnutrition. There's essentially 0 homelessness and 0 unemployment in Cuba. I'm not saying everything in Cuba is perfect. It's not. But the good aspects are scary to our capitalist ruling class. For those of you who are American, imagine for a second living a life where you never for 1 minute fear you'll end up homeless or unable to pay for healthcare costs or drowning in student loan debt or sitting next to Andrea Mitchell on a long flight. Tough to even conceive. Delta puts Andrea Mitchell next to you if you don't pay for the upgrade. And Cuba has a lower infant mortality rate and a longer life expectancy than the US. All of these are the real reasons the US government has kept their boot on Cuba's throat for 60 years. The numerous US sanctions constitute the most severe and prolonged system of unilateral coercive measures ever applied against any country, the UN Commission concluded. Or maybe the US hates Cuba because they're actually the ones who put the ROM into Ramalama Ding Dong. Yeah, they did that. They made it out of old car parts and mojitos, and then just shoved it into the llama's ding dong. That's the most censored news for this week, but we are completely independently funded. If you want to see this show continue, please share it, subscribe, and also become a member on Patreon. But I have also just started a new interview show, 1-hour interviews every week with great minds like Chris Hedges, Stephen Donziger, Scott Ritter. They're all coming up, and you can get it all at Mint Press.